Another table here, another table here.
If that's we're chatting about tables. That's fine. I think if you're on a big group, or if it's the design of the restaurant is to be long tables, that's fine.
No, it's just tables next to each. Tables shouldn't be touching. There needs to be a foot minimum between each table.
Oh God, he's going Trump germaphobe again.
If the tables are touching, that means I've got to now be spatially aware.
We'll lose the whole podcast to this. Let's say hello to John. Hi, John.
Movie expert, John.
Our resident film critic.
Okay, glad to be back.
So we're doing our gangster films, but you said you wanted to bring something up.
So just before we start, this is a really great book to bring up, which is basically by the late director Sidney Lumet, who did films like Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico. I can't recommend
Wrote them.
He did a lot of other ones. But the book is called Making Movies. Now, if anybody out there is wondering what a lot of the definition of filmmaking people are, this actually is highly effective because it defines what it is. It talks about the whole process, or his process. So there's things about how he created some of those memorable scenes in Dog Day Afternoon, Murder on the Orient Express.
So what did he do? Write it or direct?
He directed Network, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, 12 Angry Men. He talks a little bit about the intricacies and the logistics of what he goes through as a director.
Yeah.
About, what the day begins, how he does rehearsals.
Okay.
And he talks a little bit about the studios. But it was written in 1995, so although it's 25 years old, the actual principles of what's discussed in this film will be welcome to any anything. And it also comes with recommendations from the late Roger Ebert, the film critic for Chicago Sun-Times. And also on the back, there's a quote from Steven Spielberg.
So what's that called?
It's called Making Movies. I got it from a copy in foils, but you can buy it online. It's about 13 quid. I mean, my copy's there.
Probably not on audio, but
definitely you can get it somewhere. So end of plug. That's
I just think if it's not in audio, forget it. I can't read the whole book. So,
but is that because of your dyslexia?
Or I can't. There's no fucking way. It take me an hour to get through the first page, what a normal book looks like. So forget. I don't even bother. So technically, it's a disability. It is. I can't read the book. There's no way.
Yeah.
So there should be any book that comes out. If you want to get under Disability Act, there should be an audiobook version as part of like the disability.
I'm sure
I want a dyslexic ramp into a book.
Yeah, I know. I understand. There probably is for most books, but obviously you can't expect someone, if it's like a small publishing house or thing, they probably don't have the money to.
No, but you think, mind you, nowadays you think that every book should be audio.
You imagine, that's
probably the majority. You'd think
there's probably most books, but it's just obviously the whole back catalogue of books from thousands.
And I like autobiographies. The problem is, if I listen to your book and it's not you reading it. That's it. I'm not going through it. I don't care who you are.
Well, a lot of people, there are a lot of famous actors who will read a lot of those classic books. So, and I think it's I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't know whether somebody related to Sidney Lumet or whether Lumet himself did it before he died.
Right. Yeah.
But I just think I was so enthralled with this book. I mean, I read it very quickly. That's the great thing. It's just yeah, sure. There. So it's just worth reading and there's also things like the call sheets, what's described on a call sheet, what exactly a Teamster is, what the assistant director is,
Teamsters
they're like union people who drive people around.
We'll get on to gangster films in a second.
Exactly. Yeah, Hoffa.
But yeah.
What did you think of? Are we going to talk about?
Well, I will be touching on it briefly about The Irishman, but my problem with it is that I just think it's too familiar. I just kind of feel that although I don't get me wrong, I think it's enjoyable. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I liked it. But the problem is I'd seen it before.
Yeah, I sort of, I had intended to see it. I'm so behind on so many films. I haven't even seen the latest Star Wars. But I did, the one thing that made me like it was I thought, it's like getting the old gang back together, for one last ride. Kind of one of those. It almost felt like one of those 70s films, where they get all the old actors back together.
I like that it's a real story and all that. The only problem with it is, if you're gonna have Al Pacino, he's so specific.
Hoo-ha!
You can't. If you're gonna have him in your film, don't make him shout.
Yeah, but
that's Pacino. That's the whole thing.
But then don't play it. You can't play a person that's known because he's Pacino.
The whole thing about it is that I think this is the whole thing about it. I just think it was like, look, De Niro was pushing for this, and were it not for the input of Netflix, because. they actually almost pulled the plug on it because it was 90 million. It was originally a 90 million film, and
Just a full-on movie.
It was basically what it was because of the de-aging process, because of what they were using to get the techniques on. I mean, even though that was the weird thing about it, I was half expecting about half-hour sequence with dinner, and all it is of him standing over a grave shooting somebody.
Yeah.
That was the most disappointing thing, because they used it on all the technique, and from a technical point of view, I think it's very, very good. But it's like, look, I've seen this film before. I'm kind of at a point now where, look, I don't want any more kind of Italian gangster epics, coming
with the same three characters.
And I think, as I say, I think this is kind of like a nice little swan song. I think this is the same.
It's nice to have Joe Pesci back.
Yeah. No, it's that. I've got no beef with what was made. I mean, Scorsese is a great director. This is the sort of movie that he does very well.
Yeah.
De Niro, Pesci, Keitel, Pacino. I mean, that was the real selling point, having Pacino and De Niro back together alongside it, and having the fact that they'd never worked before with Scorsese, had never worked with Pacino
that's the
before.
thing, isn't it? Yeah.
That's the selling point. But it wasn't, because Netflix actually were looking for content, and so even the studio didn't want to finance the film.
But what's the negative of it?
Well, it wasn't that. It's just that
Money?
it's too expensive. Yeah, because you've got to kind of. To me, it's more like a 2-part TV movie. It's kind of like The Irishman. I think the upside of it is now with Netflix is that you can have this multi-platform idea. Although that said, like we were talking just before the podcast began about 1917, I think there's a purely cinematic. Certain movies have a pure cinematic feel. The fact that Netflix had actually said, well, we're going to put it in cinemas because people can watch it, because it's Scorsese is very much a cinematic director. But he now has the crossover of putting it on Netflix. Same with Dolomite Is My Name, the Eddie Murphy movie, which again is his best work since Beverly Hills Cop.
They're not filmed differently, knowing they're going to be on a TV Netflix. Hang on, it was in the cinema then?
It was in the cinema before. It played in the cinema initially, and then they put it on Netflix.
As a full-on release?
As a full-on release.
You can't get Oscar nominated otherwise.
Yeah, so they had to put it in. They had to put it in the cinemas to qualify it for Oscar.
So if Netflix were going to make a film for Netflix, would they film it differently, knowing it's going to be on a TV screen?
No, it's simply today, because television and film, if you think of what's happening now with things like Westworld, the creative writing, the wonderful thing now is that there's a whole generation of writers who are now creating this very solid product. Westworld, I want to see it, but I've heard some really great things about it. It's like, the Michael Crichton version I watched recently, and I think it's a really great idea. But it's the fact that Game of Thrones is now superseding something that, when you think of things like the Beastmaster and the Conan the Barbarian and stuff, people are now using television as a great way of telling these epic stories. Some stories do warrant a longer canvas. So television is suitable for that. Yeah. In the cinema, for example, it's becoming much more event movies. So if you take Star Wars, for example, I'm kind of relieved, because I've been waiting 30 years for the final ninth film of the thing, because they announced in 1980, and I didn't feel cheated. I was glad that it happened. Well, great, now I can leave that behind and just move on. So television...
You need some closure.
So, that was exactly... So television does give... I think what happens now, because people are now... There are certain writers who want to do long-form content. So Amazon, for example, people like Amazon and Netflix and Apple Plus, or these other companies, Disney Plus, for example, with The Mandalorian, they're now, with the potential for what you can do with visual effects, but it's all down to the storytelling. In the case of the movies that we're going to talk about,
is it Netflix got their own cinema somewhere? They've just opened up their own cinema.
I don't know.
Yeah, they have. They've opened up
they have Netflix cinema. Is it England or?
I think it's in America. I'm not sure. I think it might have even been something that they bought. Like a famous prestige.
Because that could
cinema.
be like a thing in it. Like 20 years, you could go to the Netflix.
Yes, but it
everywhere.
would be. I mean, you couldn't. They would have to. They would be. I think you'd. Anti-monopoly laws would mean they probably have to show other people's.
Because that's what I'm saying. Because there is a thing with because the thing with the whole cinema thing is that I feel Airplane team summed it up in a interview when they were doing Top Secret.
Yeah.
They were talking about the fact that they did Police Squad on TV. They said that this is the reason why we did The Naked Gun or Top Secret, is because there's so many distractions at home. Don't get me wrong. What I love about home cinema and digital, streaming is the fact that it does retain the quality of the work that you watch. Whereas 30 years ago, when all we had was VHS. So people didn't really have a clue about how to present their films. They thought, right, we'll buy a film, we'll stick it on a tape, put it out in a video library. That's it. Nowadays, you get the proper ratio. So you have these really great special editions on Blu-ray. And that retains quality. On TV, you have high definition. I think we've discussed this before. But that's the kind of thing is I think the cinematic experience has to be retained. I think people will still want to go to cinema because kids want to escape. Kids don't want to stay at home. You're going to have, if you have like a family of 4 and the kids, want to take their girls, they want to go out. It's still a great day thing.
I think it's different films suit different medium and different stories. Sorry, Kerem, you were going to...
So it seems they bought out this cinema theater called Paris Theater in New York, like a 70-year-old.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, I was thinking it wasn't one I knew, but...
Whereabouts is it?
It's in New York. But
but whereabouts in New York?
I am. Here it doesn't.
Okay.
Right.
We put him under pressure now.
It's actually around Central Park. It's very.
Oh right, so it's okay.
So
it's more
is Fifth Avenue.
Okay, so so that's kind of like the north of the thing near Central Park. Oh, that's great. So that's
thank you, Kerem. That was Kerem, our
Thanks.
producer.
Okay.
I was just looking at the making movies. What do you call it? What's this bit called?
Making movies.
The preface?
Yeah.
The title. I need to see what the page is. I can't guess what the page is.
10 pages here aren't needed.
Yeah, but I mean,
contents.
yeah, but it's like,
It's
not
quite,
your magazine.
straightforward stuff. I thought it'd be quite highfalutin, but like the chapter 1 is that the director, the best job in the world. Are writers necessary?
Yeah. But that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Can
Yes, end
actors
of the
really
chapter.
be shy? I mean, that's quite an odd thing to...
But he talks, as I say, when you read the different sections, you get a sense of it because he talks about the logistics and about their process and about how they do it. So yeah, right. Okay.
So, Mr. Gangster film. Oh, are you taking a picture?
I want to audiobook it to see if
Okay,
it's
fair
on.
enough. So we're talking gangster films.
We are, yes.
We started at the end, I guess, with Irishman.
Yeah. So we're going to go back. Pretty much the movies. I was thinking about this because I think we're looking at different things. So it's like there's 5 sections that I've brought into which we're going to talk into the context. First of all, it's the genre itself, why I like gangster movies, the style of gangster movies, the common vision of gangster movies, and the locale. We'll be talking about two classic British gangster movies, plus of course 6 American gangster movies. I'm not even gonna. You will know which ones they are.
I think this is going to be like unlike the usual shows that you do with us, where you tell us about some very interesting or completely obscure but very brilliant film that no one else has heard of, which we like because it's all. But I think, to be honest, if you ask most people, with the odd exception, they might go for something, like is City of God a gangster film?
City of God actually is
that the
Brazilian. It's a Brazilian boom. Well, it's more about the slums of
because I was thinking, is Boys in the Hood a gangster film? But probably
yeah,
not.
I forgot about
gang
that.
But it's
culture
more.
is a background
But
element,
it's weird because it's kind of like the black experience. So the ones I've gone for is I'm going to give you the list just to say.
Let's go.
So Godfather 1 and 2, Goodfellas, Scarface, Untouchables, Carlito's Way, and then the British contingencies along Good Friday and Get Carter.
Good films, yeah.
So the one thing I did notice was that most of gangster movies always seem to be adapted from a novel or source material of some kind. So we're going down the list. So with the exception of Long Good Friday, which was the original screenplay by the late Barry Keefe, everything else is based on a book. So The Godfather is based on Marion Puzo's
Have
novel.
any of these been made into theatre plays, gangster films?
No, I think...
They're quite, because they're just set pieces, aren't they, really?
Well, Barry Keefe was a theatre writer. He did do something. And then so the story goes, he was looking for something to watch on a Friday night, and then he came up with the idea of doing a story based on the Easter weekend. So it was originally called the Paddy, I think the Paddy Money or something. It was the Paddy Factor. And what's famous about this movie?
Irishman.
Yeah. So, but basically what had happened was when it was made, it was actually Lou Grade actually was going to sell it to TV, and a group of critics in London, led by Barry Norman, said this is too good a movie to be released. So George Harrison, as he did with The Life of Brian at the time, saved the movie and then put it out in the cinemas. So just giving you a brief rundown, it's about a guy called Howard Shand.
So what film's this?
This is The Long Good Friday.
Okay.
So Howard Shand is played by Bob Hoskins, who's brilliant in it. He's a very well-known and respectable gangster in London, and he wants to put together a deal with the American mafia.
This is the film we're talking
This is the film we're talking about. So, unfortunately, just as the Americans arrive, played by Eddie Constantine as Charlie and his sidekick, his lawyer, all of a sudden a series of bad incidents occur. So, for example, one of his main delivery guys, Colin, who's basically goes to Belfast, he gets stabbed by Pierce Brosnan.
Yes, that was it,
And then basically his driver gets blown up. They discover a bomb in the casino.
Does Pierce Brosnan do his? I have seen this film, but not for a while. Does he do the Irish accent?
He's actually silent, but he plays. He's briefly in it for about 2 or 3 scenes, but he actually is. But the great thing is he's so cool in it. So you can imagine him when you see him in the film. He's actually the way he holds the gun. You could kind of see him. Well, he would look great.
It's the steps, isn't it? It's Long Good Friday, then it's Remington, then it's Bond.
But it's also notable because Helen Mirren, who plays his partner Victoria, she plays this very intelligent this Jane Bond. She's not the usual gangster's mold, and I think it's one of the reasons, one of the great performances why Helen Mirren has become such a great actress. She is a great actress, and she's tremendous.
What year is this?
This is 1980.
Oh.
So what's significant about it is the actual screenplay. I can't recall a British film where there's been so many great lines. I mean, it's just fantastic. Like he says, the wonderful line is there's a line where he goes, what was it? There's a line early on where he goes, yeah, the Yanks love snobbery. They always like it when they come over to here and the middle class treat them like shit. And he goes, there's things like, he goes, it gets, and there's a scene where his pub gets blown up. He goes, hello, Parky, I think the dinner's got burnt. And there's sequences like, for example, one of the most memorable sequences is in Avatar where he's basically everybody's scrambling around and basically they sort of haul people in, hanging upside down on hooks and stuff. And then literally there's a whole thing goes, for more than 10 years there's been peace. Everyone to his own patch. I've done every single one of your favours in the past. Put money in all your pockets. And then it's like, but one of my favourite lines was the one where there's a thing where Collins died and he goes, and he's in the baths where he's been stabbed, and the guy who runs this pool attendant, he goes, Howard, we're going to send him over in an ice cream van. He goes, oh, that's great. Sending him on with dignity in a Raspberry Ripple. So there's like...
Is Bob Hoskins still alive?
No, he died.
No,
he retired.
Ago.
But the other one is he goes, there's a big meeting in this room, and he goes, well, 2 brothers. He goes, well, basically split them up. Pick them up together and split them apart. We're messing with their telepathy. So the great thing is my whole point is the movies. It's always interesting when you think of these movies that the lines, the dialogue is actually what defines them. And the other thing as well is, when somebody says something pleasant, damn well 5 minutes later, if somebody says to me, I think we're going to take him on a ride somewhere, and damn well they're going to take him to a bush and then kill him.
Yeah.
Who directed this?
This was a guy called John Mackenzie.
And what had he done?
Later on he did the Michael Caine, the excellent Michael Caine Frederick Forsyth adaptation, The Fourth Protocol, which again starred Pierce Brosnan. So it's about blowing up a bomb on American Air Force Base. Very topical now. It's a great movie to watch. It's one of those that Michael Caine produced. He co-produced it, and it's a really nice. If you look at films like The Bourne Identity and the later James Bond, Caine actually, because he did the Ipcress File and Funeral in Berlin, this sort of was a return to his doing the Harry Palmer type thing. So yeah, that's
what's the relevance of the name of the film?
the
Something
fourth
goes down.
the
The Friday.
The longer Friday. Well, it starts on Good Friday. You know,
Oh,
it
okay.
starts because it's you know, effectively it's the weekend, and then all of a sudden things start happening, and then it actually features Gillian Tailforth in it as well, who was
Oh, really?
she actually has there's a scene
Why do I
between
know that name?
from EastEnders.
Kathy
Oh,
Beale.
yeah.
So she actually has a sequence where at one point she discovers a body, and she turns up. She's got a hair. She's barely recognizable. There's other people a lot of the characters a lot of the actors in there. Brian Hall, for example, who played Terry in 40 Towers, he was in there as well. So he plays one of the henchmen. PJ Moriarty, who plays Razors, was in there. Paul Barber is in it as well, who played Denzel in Only Fools and Horses. He actually gets he has a very unpleasant moment where Razors he slices his ass. But, you know, there's a very powerful sequence where he goes, "This is Razors, also known as Clapham Junction."
Nice.
But so that's the first one, and I just wanted to point out it's just an amazing piece of it. It's
It was funny them days when there's like 10 British actors that were just in everything. That went from the Bills to EastEnders to movies to back out again. They started in Grange Hill.
But it's odd as well to see that film and go, oh, that's lovable Bob Hoskins. What's he up to? Oh, no.
But this was actually his breakout film, and actually David Denby, who's one of the top American critics, he said that the funny thing is when you watch Hoskins in The Longer Friday, it's very much American thing. So I'm going to lead on from that to The Untouchables, and I'll tell you why.
Kevin Costner.
No, it's not that. There's an interesting connection between The Untouchables, the 1987 film. Okay, so this is an interesting story. Robert De Niro was the first choice of Brian De Palma to play Al Capone in The Untouchables.
What year is this?
1987.
Was that not a Kevin Costner thing?
Yes, it was a Kevin Costner thing.
Oh.
So this
Oh,
is
it was, okay,
this is the story. So Bob Hoskins, because De Niro was not available, Brian De Palma tapped up Bob Hoskins to play Al Capone. So of course, Bob Hoskins went off to play it. De Palma said, "Sorry, Bob, we won't be needing you anymore," because De Niro was available. About 3 weeks after, a check for $200,000 arrived on Bob Hoskins' door, because he basically got paid the full salary.
Oh, wow.
And he says it was, and Hoskins said at the time it was the easiest $200,000 he made. So we're going to move on to the De Palma trilogy, the Gangster trilogy. Now, basically, just to recap, these were adapted. I mean, The Untouchables was an update of a TV series with Robert Stack, who was one of the in Airplane and stuff, but it was like the Elliot Ness thing, and it was scripted by David Mamet, directed by Brian De Palma. And then Scarface was originally based on a novel by Armitage Trail and made in a film in 1931 with Paul Mooney. And we're going to talk about the 1983 version, which is the famous Al Pacino version, which was updated by Oliver Stone to Miami and about the whole drug lords.
Was the original Scarface anything to do with immigration?
It was different. It was a classic bona fide gangster film. So it was pretty much in the realm of things like Humphrey Bogart's, James Cagney films. It was your bona fide.
How was the gangster making money? It wouldn't be drugs, would it?
It was different. It was like
Alcohol,
booze, prohibition,
yeah,
that kind of thing. So basically the movie is, just to recap, just to say, a Cuban immigrant called Tony Montana.
This is Scarface.
This is Scarface. Basically, Castro gets rid of all the immigrants from Cuba. They arrive in Miami.
Flushed his toilet
Flushed
onto
his
America.
toilet, yeah, flown to America. And then basically Tony Montana is one of the people who then gets put into Freedom Town, which is this slum. It's a bit like the refugee village in Paris recently. And then basically a local gangster businessman called Omar Suarez, who's played by the Oscar-winning actor F. Murray Abraham, who played Salieri in Amadeus. He sort of says to him, right, you want to make some real money? You've got $5,000 if you go and pick up this cocaine from these Colombians at a Miami hotel.
Can I just throw a little fact trivia? Listen,
You
to
can.
You know the bit where he arrives at the port and the copper, who's the copper, grabs him by the face.
Yeah.
Said, how'd you get these?
Yeah, eating pussy.
Yeah, when he first did that and he grabbed his face, the director said, cut, and he took him aside and said, don't touch De Niro. What's his name?
Pacino.
He
Yeah.
said, don't touch his face. So they did it again. and he did it, but he didn't get anywhere near him. And then Pacino cut the scene, and he went, "What the fuck's going on?" He said, "Oh, I'm not allowed to touch her." He said, "Get the fucking thing." That's why I said next time he really grabs his fucking face and closes it. But the director told him not to touch him.
It's not that essentially an extra, a supporting background role like that you would initially. I mean, it's great that he did. Really, that you would just grab. If it's not in the script, you wouldn't grab.
Yeah, the director actually stopped it, and then he said, "Like, don't touch his face."
There's actually the funny thing is they show you some of the changes to the original TV version. Nowadays it's great because you watch it. But they said, the scene. He goes, "Where did you get that? Eating pussy?"
Yeah.
And then they said, "No, where did you get it? Eating pineapple?"
Oh, no.
So
That's a good one, yeah.
continue on. So he goes to this hotel room with a group of people, and then basically there's a bit of a standoff, and then his friend there's a chainsaw that comes into the zone, and I saw this on late nights, and because you don't technically see it, but it freaks you out because it's a bit like Reservoir Dogs because you think it's there. And so basically he gets this whole thing, and then he starts meeting Robert Loggia, who's a local crime hood, and then he brings the cocaine to there, and then he grows and evolves as a gangster. And then he meets, and then basically there's a Colombian drug lord who he becomes part of it, and then it becomes bigger and bigger and then more excessive. The gang, Robert Loggia's wife is Elvira, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. This was her first big role since Grease 2, because Grease 2 failed.
Oh, she was Grease 2.
She played Stephanie Zinon as one of the pink ladies, sort of in the thing, but the movie didn't do all that well. But then she auditioned for Scarface, and that transformed her into what it was. Okay. And then it just gets more excessive. The violence just explodes, and then there's that incredible final sequence. He goes, "Say hello to my little friend." But it's I think it's. Nowadays, I mean, people have looked beyond the violence and the excess, and it's actually one of the great American-style movies of the 80s.
Mm-hmm. But it got toileted, didn't it, when it first came out?
Because famously, Joan Collins said at the premiere, he goes, "There's 169 fucks." He goes, "Jesus, that's more than I'll ever get in a lifetime." So that's the first one. Then, so going back to The Untouchables, which in some ways actually is a Western posing as a gangster film. Because it doesn't look in a way, although it's very much the story of Elliot Ness v. Al Pacino, the action sequences for me...
Is it during the Prohibition?
It's 1930, the Prohibition. It sort of heightens it. So, of course, the story is Elliot Ness. He's a fresh-faced new federal officer, and basically Kevin Costner screws up, and then he meets Jimmy Malone, who's this disgruntled cop, and then does the whole thing where he meets him on a bridge and says, "You want to throw your garbage away? Throw it in the goddamn trash basket." And then
because it's Sean Connery.
Yeah. So and then basically the next thing is there's a guy called Oscar Wallace, who's an accountant played by Charles Martin Smith, who basically wants to get Capone on tax evasion. And Ness says, "Look, just sit there." And then basically Malone takes Ness to a hotel and he goes, "You pulls your knife, you pulls your gun. You want to send yours to the hospital? You want to morgue? That's the Chicago way." Then he basically recruits this sharpshooter from the police, who's not been corrupted.
Who does the gangsters?
No, Ness and Malone.
Okay.
And it's basically George Stone or Giuseppe Pedre, and Andy Garcia comes in, and then essentially they start picking up, and the first battle is actually on a bridge on the Canadian border, which is this terrific sequence. This is where it sort of diverges a little bit from the gangster thing, because it's a Western. It's like a great sequence where they're riding on horses and they're shooting people. Then Frank Nitti...
In Untouchables?
In The Untouchables.
Yeah.
So,
right.
And then Capone sort of gets really angry. And then, of course, things start happening. And then there's this wonderful sequence. There's a Grand Central Station shootout at the very end, which was basically improvised by De Palma, because the original sequence was going to be on a train. So, unfortunately, they ran out of money. De Palma says, "Give me a pram and a few guns and a few things, and we'll stage it out here." And then he paid homage...
Why is there a pram turning up?
In a minute. Oh. Basically, it's a homage to Battleship Potemkin, the Odessa Steppe sequence.
Yeah.
So,
silent film.
Battleship Potemkin is actually about the Russian Revolution, but there's a sequence in it where basically Eisenstein stages this amazing sequence where people are being shot on the stairs, and the pram is actually one of the defining images. There's always like a single image that happens. So, for example, it's kind of weird when like how objects can define a movie. Like the ring, for example, in Lord of the Rings, or I suppose, the lightsaber or stuff like that. So in Potemkin and then subsequently Untouchables, the pram is actually the thing that goes down. And it's got a great score by Ennio Morricone. Okay, so that's that one. Got to talk about Carlito's Way. This was, again, totally contrasting film. Funny enough, they're all period bombs. Scarface was set in 1980. The Untouchables was 1930. Carlito's Way is 1975.
When it was released?
1992, 93 was when it was released.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But it's set.
It was based on
right.
It was based on a pair of novels by a guy called Edwin Torres called Carlito's Way and After Hours. Carlito's Way is actually his upbringing in New York, but it's actually a very literal book. I mean, the film itself only retains certain characters like Carlito and David Kleinfeld, who is the character played by Sean Penn. Carlito Briganti is again a Puerto Rican gangster who's just been released from prison. He is his lawyer Kleinfeld has negotiated an early release. So he kind of goes into the neighborhood, and then his nephew says, "You've come to this place, and you walk in there, you're a goddamn legend." So there's a perception of him being this incredible legend. And basically, this drug deal goes wrong, and his nephew gets killed, and then all of a sudden the old instincts kick in, and there's a shootout where he actually has to escape. So he takes the money that was from the drug deal and he decides, I'm going to invest. So he has this dream of going to the Bahamas to sell cars, and he's going to do it, and he's going to raise his 75 grand. So he
the old one last deal thing.
So he goes to a local nightclub with a local club owner called Sosa, who he nicknames Ron. He calls himself Ron. He goes, there's thing in the film. So basically, Sean Penn is doing okay. Then there's a gangster in prison on Rikers Island prison bar called Tony Taglialuccia. Kleinfeld is not as straightforward with it as it is, because basically he takes 1 million from Taglialuccia, but then Taglialuccia says, you've got $1 million credit. You're going to spring me from the barge. And then, of course, things start closing in on it. If you watch the movie, you can kind of sort of sense how it ends, because basically the movie kind of opens and
Sean
stuff.
Penn starts doing drugs and it all falls apart.
But that's the funny thing, because the opening shot kind of, which I thought was a shame, because I think the film has a certain Hitchcockian, the climax has a certain Hitchcockian thing about it, because De Palma's Hitchcockian influence plays on it. There's a great score. The other thing is there's a fantastic score by Patrick Dorr, who was Kenneth Branagh's composer. He did things like Dead Again and a lot of the but he wrote this really beautiful score. It's brilliant. It's also got a great 70s music score like You Should Be Dancing and the Backstabbers and stuff like that. But the other thing is the amazing performance by Sean Penn, who is totally unrecognizable. He has these really big hair things in there. But it's a really nice companion piece to Scarface. Although the difference is Carlito is a man who wants to go straight. Tony Montana's got no moral obligation. He knows damn well he wants all the cocaine. I mean, there's that wonderful shot with the mountain of thing.
Wasn't there a second Carlito's Way?
There was. It was on video, but it was a different film. But it kind of went straight to video because
it's just using the name.
Yeah, it was a totally different thing.
Okay.
So back to Britain and the film that sort of defines all gangster movies in the UK, and that's Get Carter, the original 1971 version.
Michael Caine.
So not the remake with Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah,
we're not.
But now
Is this one with the Mini?
No, that's the Italian job. Oh. So I had the pleasure of actually interviewing Tony Klinger, who's the son of Michael Klinger, who's the producer, and I spoke to him about this. And I asked him, he said, why is it that Get Carter has actually endured? He said, well, because it's the attitude. He said a lot of the movies, the gangster films like the Guy Ritchie things, don't have the attitude. Now, a bit of background, Michael Klinger was actually a pioneer. He actually sort of ran a series of movie theaters. I can actually send you the link to the interview. It's a fantastic. I was quite proud of this interview because this guy, Tony Klinger, actually worked with The Who on The Kids Are All Right, you know, and he talked about John Entwistle and stuff. I mean, I'll send you the link because it's a fantastic interview. So, again, this was adapted from a novel by Ted Lewis called Jack's Return Home. Michael Caine co-produced it with Michael Klinger because he wanted to get into producing. He was established as a star because of Ipcress File. It's about a guy called Jack Carter who decides to go up to Newcastle to investigate what happened to his brother.
So Michael Caine is the main.
Michael Caine is the main.
I'm assuming this is Michael Caine playing Michael Caine.
No, but
it's quite different. I
it's
think,
it's well, it's what when you think about it, it was 1971, and of course this was the time of Straw Dogs, of Clockwork Orange, when violence in films were there. The thing, it also features Brian Moseley, who was Alf Roberts in Coronation Street, and he is the most. There's a scene where he gets chucked, where Michael Caine chucks him off the top of a car park in Wallsend, and that was actually a famous location for years. It had disappeared from Newcastle because Newcastle was developed as a city.
So it's quite a violent film, then, is it?
Very violent.
Oh, really?
It's also quite surprising when you watch it. It's actually. So it's also the fact there's a scene with Britt Eklund where Michael Caine actually seduces Britt Eklund over the phone, and she's sort of playing with herself.
Oh, really?
But it's a very sleazy. The context of it is that it's actually, for the time that it was very, very sleazy. I mean, Hitchcock was about to make Frenzy, which was a very violent movie for the time, which was against the grain of what it was.
I love the it's to do with the sleaziness. I don't want to say who's in the film because it's a bit of a spoiler, but there's a bit where they're sat down to watch essentially a porn film.
Yeah.
And the shot is just Michael Caine's face watching it,
Yeah.
and you it's such a brilliant piece of subtle acting.
So what's the story? Who is he? A gangster? Is he?
So it's his brother is killed.
Yeah, his
isn't it?
brothers who killed. So he goes up to, essentially he goes up without revealing too much. The story is Michael Caine going up to discover what happened to his brother. And then
he's not a copper or a gangster.
He's not a copper. He literally goes around and then he starts pursuing people. It also has a great score by Roy Budd, who did the Wild Geese and Who Dares Wins. It's a really great jazz type score. And it was directed by Mike Hodges, who went on to do the Flash Gordon movie.
Yeah. That's a bit of a leap.
So,
Yeah.
but it's such a fantastic thing. I mean, he did that's cool. So
it's got one of the all-time best endings as well.
Yeah,
absolute spoiler territories. We won't even go
yeah.
there. But it's got.
It's a fantastic. But to be honest with you, I kind of, you know, we could talk about Layer Cake, for example. Matthew Vaughan's Layer Cake with Daniel Craig. That actually for me was one of the best of the things since Longer Fray, because that's got a lot of twists and turns. Got Sienna Miller in. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the last two, because I think inevitably we have to talk. Well, we must talk about Goodfellas. Again, this is adapted from a book by Nicholas Pileggi called Wise Guy. Now, if you're wondering why the title was changed to Goodfellas, it was simply because in the 80s there was a series on TV called Wise Guy with a guy called Ken Wall. Now, Ken Wall was an actor who was in the films. He was in The Wanderers, which was directed by Philip Kaufman, which was a really beautifully New York thing in that. And he also was in a film which was directed by James Glickenhaus in 1983 called Codename The Soldier, which had Klaus Kinski in it. And it was...
the film was called Codename The Soldier.
It was called Codename The Soldier in the UK. It was originally The Soldier in America.
Right.
And had a score by Tangerine Dream. Anyway, cut a long story short. Nicholas Pileggi wrote this book called Wise Guy, which is based on the life of Henry Hill. And the book was optioned by producer Irwin Winkler, who was the producer on Rocky. And Irwin Winkler has actually written a great book, My 50 Years in Films, which you can pick up, which has got the whole story of Rocky, Raging Bull, King of Comedy, you know, the right stuff. Fascinating book. It's in their books now. There's a great picture of Irwin Winkler and Stallone outside the cinema on open day for Rocky. So this was a movie that brought Scorsese back to the gangster genre.
What year did this come out? 70s?
1989, 1990.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it was a little bit different to what, you know, it was kind of like a companion piece to Mean Street. So Mean Street was the start-off point. And then basically Scorsese worked with Nicholas Pileggi on the script. It kind of defines really what happened. Every kind of movie after that kind of defined it with the voiceover and the sequences and stuff like that. I mean, the famous how the fuck am I funny thing was an improvised situation. So when you watch the sequence, the funny thing is you can kind of even hear Scorsese laughing in the background because it's like he's doing the sequence. Really? So the funny thing is everybody in the cinema. It's such a very funny moment because, you know, the kind of contrast, because it's weird because you have this sequence where, you know, the way that it kind of goes from, you know, it's very intense, and he's sort of, you know, damn well Pesci's this exploding thing, and then all of a sudden he goes, gotcha. It's like a tremendous wind up. I mean, I love the sequence where the young Henry Hill, he, you know, the father says to him, you know, you haven't been to school in months, and then there's a sequence where he points out the post office, and he goes, any more letters go to the house? In the fucking oven you're gonna go. And then there's a sequence where then Lorraine Bracco meets as well, and then of course there's that famous sequence with the Copacabana Club where they design the actual the sequence, you know, the Steadicam shot. So it's like
it's quite music heavy as well, isn't it? Like,
well, Scorsese, the relationship. You see, it's also impossible to imagine a Scorsese movie without music. It's impossible because of the fact that you know, whenever I think of, you know, I can, you know, a lot of people sometimes pinpoint "Give Me Shelter" by the Rolling Stones. That's a song that always tends to turn up in. It turned up in The Departed as well.
What's that? What's the song?
You know, no, don't give me shelter, just a shot away. It's just a shadow. You'll know the song if you hear. Yeah. And it's probably one of the Rolling Stones' best songs. But it was used at the beginning of The Departed when Jack Nicholson's talking, and then it's also as well the way that they edit the music together. So there's a sequence where a couple of bodies are discovered in the car, and they use the play out in Layla.
When they find the two brothers.
Yeah. You know, the sequence where he's...
No, I remember the scene. I'm trying to remember the music.
It's it's the piano.
Oh no! When I say it again,
yeah. Watch it again. So I always found it's such a. I mean, Samuel Jackson's in it as well, but there's also the sequence where they, at the very beginning of the film, where Billy Batts is in the thing and he goes, and you know, there's kind of like the intensity of the violence. It had changed somewhat from what we'd seen before, and I think Scorsese. It's like Scorsese had a habit of, he had a moral or a very artistic.
What's the name of that actor? I've forgotten that. It's Vincent something, isn't it?
Yeah,
the chap
the grey hair.
Vincent Schiarelli, I think.
Yeah, because he's always the guy, but he gets his own back in Casino. Finally,
yeah,
he gets it because he gets beaten up by Pesci in Raging Bull as well, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah.
But he gets his own back finally in Casino.
Yeah. But it's like the whole mix of it, and about the fact that. You know, I like. There's a moment where
get your fucking shoe shine. Sorry.
Yeah, but there's a sequence when the neighbor sort of has attacked. When the neighbors attacked Henry Hill's wife, and then there's that sequence where he sort of goes up to him and he bashes him. He bashes him with the thing. But there's also that contrast where Lorraine Bracco says that when he goes, there are many women who have got out there. I have to say it turned me on. And then there's, of course, a sequence where, you know, the police would turn up at the door and she says, you know, I could never understand why people would spit on their own floor. And then it kind of, the way that it's the pacing of the film, it's the fact that you get really involved with all the characters. You know, there's a sequence after the robbery, and then everybody turns up, he goes, and somebody's wearing a mink coat, and he goes, I've got to show you the car. Didn't I tell you not to get anything?
Yeah.
And then, but there's also the thing where...
he starts pulling the coat off his wife.
Yeah.
Saying, what's happening?
Yeah.
Give her the fucking
and then
coat.
there's...
Shut the fuck up
and then, of course, there's... But the thing is, it's like, I can't imagine, no other actor can do what De Niro's doing, where he goes, what did I tell you? What did I tell you? What did I... And that's the other thing why I think it's... In any other genre, people would never get... You can't imagine the way people talk in a... If you can't imagine somebody in the Jane Austen movie doing what they do in Gangsters. You know, like, you can't imagine Darcy saying, Bennett, what did I tell you? What did I tell you? We're not going, you know.
He's got that sort of thing where he's being violent, but he's trying to be quiet at the same time.
You can't imagine it like in a costume drama, like a working title costume drama. You know, like with Lily James or something like that, and they're going up and he goes,
That's the next one. Pride and Gangsters or something like
that.
Pride and Prejudice and Two Smoking Barrels. Copyright Andrew Ford right now.
Yeah. So it's like that. So the thing is there's a way. There's also a manner about the style of it. I mean, if we're going back, so the locale is interesting. I mean, in England, it's interesting because Longer Friday's London, Get Carter's Newcastle. So there's a kind of with the exception of that, very few gangster films in the UK are actually shot outside of London. London seems to be this thing where there's a wonderful thing with the location. So so a lot of the Ray Winston movies, the Nick Love, The Business, the one with Danny Dyer, for example, is actually a pretty good movie because
they go through Costa del Sol,
Spain and stuff. And Georgina Chapman, who is Harvey Weinstein's ex-wife, she plays a role in that as well. I get.
Is she his now ex-wife, as in most recent ex-wife? I don't know if he was.
Yeah, his ex-wife and stuff. But she plays this role where she's actually kind of she's a very playful character in that one. Anyway. Yeah. And so, of course, we come to finally.
Oh, wait, is that the Lufthansa? Is that
Lufthansa heist?
Yes, that was a real thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was based on he disappeared from the witness protection program in 1980. I think he breached it. I think Henry Hill.
Yeah, because he is.
He
it is a real story, isn't it? Whereas some of these are sort of suggested by real life.
Yeah,
these aren't, because I think Casino is kind of sort of real
life. Casino started because of an article. I think what they said was it started there's a sequence in it where it started with an argument on a front door, and then Scorsese decided to go backtrack to the whole thing. But with Casino, actually, let's talk a little bit about Casino, because I mean, Casino again is Scorsese. It's a more epic tale, and I think, but it also has a tendency to sort of drag itself out a bit. I think the sequences are sort of overextended in a way.
I think there's too much Sharon Stone in that.
I think
such a drag off of the film.
I actually prefer it to Goodfellas. I know that's blasphemy.
No,
I mean, again, that's only like I prefer.
Well, just to let you know, I went to the closing night London Film Festival screening in '95 of that.
Yeah,
and we were all sitting there in the Empire. And Martin Scorsese stood up in front. He goes, I hope you've all done your homework, because this is 3 hours long. And nobody knew it was 3 hours long because it had been booked. Yeah. But it was like they because I think they finished it about 2 or 3 days before. They'd locked the picture about 2 or 3 days before the London Film Festival screening. So we're all sitting in there like that. I think actually, I have to say, there are things about it I like. I think there's sequences in there. I mean, the scene with the where the guy's with the cars and he uses a hammer. He goes, you can either go out with the hammer or the money. But I also think it's got a bigger and broader soundtrack than it's got a great soundtrack. And there's also that great sequence where the two moments that always stand out for me is where they're in a golf course. And then the
FBI plane
and the plane and when the planes, he goes, the FBI plane landed because it ran out of fuel. But the other scene is that
what did he say, like $100? And it's like
if anyone can hit the plane,
And then the other sequence is where De Niro and Pesci sort of stand there in the middle of the desert. And I remember when we first saw it, and everybody's laughing, and he goes, "You're only out of here because of fucking me." But it's like but again, I think there's things about it I like.
Is it the opening bit where he talks about having to dig bury a dead body? So then somebody else comes along, you've got to bury another. So before you know it, you're out there all fucking night.
He goes, there's a lot of holes in the desert, and there's plenty of secrets that are buried in that holes. But it's again, I think, Sin. So
a friend of when we used to do security. Just reminded me, there was a guy used to talk about seeing fights, and you say, what happened to him and what happened to the guy you've just thrown out, and he used to say, he was all right, he took a few Robert De Niro kicks. That he was on the floor and someone was just stamping on him.
I don't think they even show it in the film, but it's where it turns out the guy, he's got his feet up on the desk and he asks him to move.
The cowboy.
And he says, I want you to tag him, I want you to get him out of him, I'm going to throw him out of him, I want you to use his head to open the fucking door. I love that. I think that's how they should treat people. If you got your feet up in the fucking restaurant or whatever.
But that said, I think my favourite sequences in there are actually when De Niro's actually watching for me, the scenes are where De Niro's in charge of the casino. Yeah. And the other one, he goes, you don't have to have a license to run the thing. What you do is you put it in there, and then by the time they have a whole backlog of stuff, so there he is in there. And then there's that scene, he goes, back home years ago, and then there's a caption saying, I think he was taking the piss, Scorsese, when he says back home years ago. But it's like but again, it kind of ties into the whole ambiguity that it's all going to get fucked up anyway, and it's all using.
What was the film with the guy with the wig and De Niro takes the phone and starts hitting him on the head? Giving the guy who owes some money, does an advert, come to so and so's.
Oh, that's Goodfellas. Mike Murray, he goes, like Murray has
to collect some money.
He goes to collect some money. It's actually the sequence just before, the guy gets battered with the gun,
Oh, right, yeah.
So he goes, Murray's wig. He goes, you don't get my money, you don't
Murray's
get
wigs.
Yeah.
Fuck you, pay me.
And he takes their phone, starts hitting
But
I
like, but also as well when Billy Bats gets killed, and of course they're in there, and of course he says we got to get that body out there, and he goes, here's a wing. My mother's gonna make some. And the funny thing is, there's that wonderful moment where the other sequence I do like is where they're about to go and get
Isn't that Scorsese's mother?
Scorsese's mother.
Yeah, she pops. Another one that pops.
So the great thing is that there's that wonderful moment where, and this is another thing where the tenderness of a sequence. This is what's great about Goodfellas. There's always tender moments. There's tender moments with the whole thing going on, and there's freeze frames, and it's such a wonderful. It's a wonderful menu of editing and stuff like that, but where. They and then of course the scene sits down and like the mother's not aware that they've just killed a body and they're going to bury it in the middle of something, and then she starts talking. He goes, "Look, I'm going to make you some food. I'm going to make you some food."
Is it the improv scene in? It's Casino when he goes to collect the money. They keep sending the guy over to collect the money, and he's not getting paid.
Yeah,
and he's complaining to her in the shop. That's
why they've got the wire, but it's from something else, isn't it?
When he's swearing and she starts to sort of, that was improv by her. Yeah. She said, here he goes again. Sorry, Mum, but these fucking guys are going to fucking kill me.
Yeah, because wasn't it the idea that the mic was left from a previous operation or something?
Yeah,
like that?
I got lists. I've made lists of every money they owe me.
I do. But that said, just before we move on to the final reflection, I think gangster movies have to be redefined and rebooted, I'm sure. But actually, Al Pacino's got a brand new TV show on Amazon coming out, which is the actual about a gangster pursuing Nazis.
Oh yes,
it's a really
he's an actor.
He's playing it. It's actually his first major TV show, but it's actually
a series or
it's
film?
a series. It's it's a 12-hour series. I can't recall what it is, but it's actually a fantastic. They reckon it's got really the potential to be another like epic's tale. It's like 12 films or something.
Oh, okay.
I can't recall what it is, but that's it. And then of course the final thing is we have to talk about The Godfather Part 1 and 2.
Not Part 3?
Well,
this is a movie podcast.
But The Godfather Part 3 was really kind of an afterthought. God. I think it was essentially what.
The thing is, I think if you just called that whatever the hell, if you just called made up title The Sicilian or whatever, people go, oh, that was actually quite good. I mean, the actress is maybe a bit.
Well, there was a film called The Sicilian.
No, but you know what I mean. Like if they just gave it any other title,
I
think
people
start
with a guy that's moved up, and it starts with him.
It could have
trying to get out
aging gangster. In him.
What's amazing is that when the logistics of it is Coppola said at the time, I think he was being interviewed for Godfather Part 3. He said, "Well, I never thought there'd be a Godfather Part 2."
Yeah.
The funny thing is the Godfather Part 2 was actually there's only a brief. It's what's amazing is the actual backstory of the Godfather Part 2 actually stems from about 3 or 4 pages in the novel.
Yeah,
because he talks about the Godfather was born Vito Andolini in Sicily in Corleone in 1911.
Because the book has the old dying consigliere, doesn't it?
Yeah, that kind of thing. But I think there's been several versions of it. We kind of know about the Godfather anyway. So I was first introduced to the Godfather through the Godfather, a novel for television. There is a second version which Coppola put together for television, which played over 5 nights in 1983.
Version of what?
Of The Godfather.
The whole thing?
The Godfather, a novel for television. So it was actually Godfather Part 1 and 2. Right. Now, if you can seek this out, it's a very fascinating version because it's told in chronological order. So it starts with the opening of Godfather Part 2.
Oh, okay. So
here's the other thing. There are certain deleted sequences in it. So there's also a bit about Hyman Rothstein. So there's a scene in that. There's certain other elements. So when you play it out, it actually plays out the whole of right from the very beginning. So from his, the revenge in Corleone to
the beginning, not Godfather 1 then?
No, the Godfather. The Godfather Part 1 opens with Bonacera talking to Brando. Yeah. In this TV version, it starts off with the young Vito Andolini.
Oh, he's the one that's the top,
the kid, and then he goes off to America. But it's actually the whole thing. It's basically Godfather 1 and 2, re-edited to do that. It was a 7-hour version, but it's worth watching. It was played over 5 nights in 1983. I mean, I love it.
What was it called? Do you know?
It was called The Godfather, a novel for television.
Oh. And what, can you find that? Can you?
It was available for a while.
Who was in it? Anyone of note?
No, it's the two original films. So Godfather Part 1.
Coppola has re-edited it.
Oh right.
So it's a different.
It's 7 hours.
It's a 7-hour TV version.
Oh, wow.
The other thing is they've edited out. It was actually slightly toned down. Some of the violence from James Caan's death and the sequence where when Don Fanucci is killed in the film version, De Niro shoots blasts the back of his head. You don't see that in this version. It actually just cuts from this moment where he puts the gun in.
So it's the same footage.
It's the same 2 films, but they've re-edited it as a chronological.
So that the story takes place in sequence.
Yeah.
So obviously, The Godfather 2 flashes. For one thing, it's got parts that take place before Godfather 1 because it's got the young.
It's called The Godfather, a novel for television.
Okay.
He's just pretending to write it down. He's actually ordering his delivery.
Yeah, just
quick pizza.
I'm not sure whether it's available on DVD or anything.
Probably somewhere on YouTube.
But it's on VH. But it is on VH. There was a VHS version released,
really?
which was The Godfather from 19. It was Godfather 1901 to 1959. So it was actually the version, but they did do a version.
It's so odd that they've not released that. That might be a rights thing, I guess, maybe. Or
what
do you think that in this age of DVD collections and people wanting to see? I've got. A box set of the 5 different versions of Blade Runner.
Yeah, no, I've got that version.
Yeah, it's so great. But you know what I mean? It's like, you think they would go, oh, here's the super mega deluxe version of The Godfather.
But they do have. Well, they've. I think that's another thing is they've probably released. I mean, there's about 3 or 4 releases of The Godfather and special editions. But I think I know they did release it on VHS. I think back in the 90s. I do remember that.
Yeah. It's a shame that
there's added footage as well on here. It says.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting. It's worth watching because I think also it's the version that I think introduced me to The Godfather in a way. Godfather Part 2, of course, is 2 stories. It tells the thing. I mean, famously, we can talk about the legendary sequences where Pacino wanted. They didn't really want any of the people in the film. Paramount were very wary of the film at the time because they did a film with Kirk Douglas 2 or 3 years before called The Brotherhood, which had failed. And Coppola was untried and untested. It was only after he won the Oscar as Best Screenplay for Patton, the George C. Scott film, that he actually was put in charge of it. But again, it was reduced to a very low-budget film.
Yeah. And
then became a phenomenon. The book became a phenomenon. Then the film became a phenomenon.
There's quite... Obviously, it's is one-sided, but it's Robert Evans talking about the putting together of that film. Robert Evans, the producer who died
died last year.
Yeah.
Producer of Godfather.
Yeah, I mean, he worked at the head.
He was the head of studio. He sort of produced things like Chinatown, and he was also involved with Ali McGraw at one point.
Yeah, so some of these films he was the producer. He's kind of he was the head of the studio basically. I think he jokingly said, out of the 8 major studios in Hollywood, Paramount was number 9 when I took over. And
but of course he did. He was also the subject of a very fascinating documentary called "The Kid Stays in the Picture," which was based on his biography. Oh. So that this is another thing is that there's a lot of these, it's sort of become the trend where you do get these people making these really nice exposés and they're kind of these authentic documentaries. So The Godfather was like a low-budget movie. I mean, here's one of the sequences. When Gordon Willis was the cinematographer, there's things where they did day for night, where they did certain sequences. So in the wedding sequence, there's certain sequences where they shot at night, but it's cleverly edited to make you think they're in the shadows.
Is that presumably with the meeting with Bonacera?
Yeah, the actual sequence when Al Pacino and Diane Keaton are speaking, there's a sequence which it's in the day, but they actually shot it at night. So the lighting makes you think you actually think it's in the shade of the trees, but if you were to turn it around, it's like dark anyway. Dick Smith was the makeup artist who did things like The Exorcist and Marathon Man. He was responsible for Linda Blair's head turning and stuff like that, all the physical effects.
And responsible for sticking the cotton in Godfather's mouth.
I didn't. Well, is that one of these things where many people take credit? Because Brando said he came up with that. Wasn't that his idea?
Well, the story was this: it was Brando was basically box office poison at the time, and the head of Charles Bloodon said, he goes, as long as I am head of Paramount, if you watch The Godfather, look inside, he says, I'm not gonna, he will never get that part. So Brando says, well, look, I'll test. And then, of course, the famous sequence where he put the thing in. You can see the screen test where he put the thing in there. We have talked about some of the very funny, some of the sequences where Coppola was being, they would fighting him to say, don't get Pacino and don't get Jimmy.
Yeah, because they wanted Robert Redford, didn't they?
Yeah, something like that. But but the thing is, this is where, it's a happy accident. And, I think this is a great thing where, people are happily proved wrong on all counts. And again, I think my biggest issue with the third film, for example, is, again, it's a bit like the Star Wars films. It's kind of a victim of its own hype. I think we all kind of were expecting a great movie. And again, The Godfather Part 3 is very much still remains an art house film. It's kind of like Blade Runner 2049. It's like all the kind of things that kind of irritated people about Blade Runner in 1982 kind of came to the fore again in Blade Runner 2049 because it's not a traditional science fiction film. I think Blade Runner has sort of evolved. It was only because of the famous thing, because of the work prints. That discovery by Michael Arrick in 1990 where he discovered the 70mm print, which was used for sneaks in Dallas and Denver, I think, from what I read from Newton Noir. But I think that's fantastic. I think The Godfather Part 1 and 2 ushered in a new era of filmmakers. It is, it kind of was the start-off point for the movie brats. Because if you think about it, Coppola was successful first, then you had Lucas with American Graffiti, then you had Spielberg with Jaws, then you had like George Lucas' Star Wars. And it was a period when the creativity of these great movie brats was happening. So I think, Coppola was the pioneer. He was kind of like
well, because he's a bit older than them, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he was their mentor, wasn't he? Particularly Lucas.
And then American Zoetrope, which was the thing that they put together, because you had THX 1138, which was the expanded version of the short that Lucas did, which won many things and then went into there anyway. Spielberg, of course, around the same time of Godfather, was making his mark with Jewel on TV, which became a theatrical release in the UK. Apparently, there's one shot in Jewel where you can clearly see him on the side, because on TV it was Academy ratio, but they did it in 1:5, and you can clearly see Spielberg reflected in one moment.
What year did it come out then? 73?
72 was... So just going through those movies, so you had The Godfather in 1971, you had Jewel in 1972, you had Alice Don't Live Here Anymore 1973, American Graffiti in 1973, Jaws 1975.
Exorcist 77?
Exorcist was 73.
Oh, that early.
Godfather Part 2 came out in 1974. Jaws in 1975, Star Wars 1977, Close Encounters 1977, Apocalypse Now 1979, which everybody says is a work. He always says it was a work in progress, even when they showed it in competition at Cannes, where it won the Palme d'Or.
So what happened in the 70s? Was it a reaction to something? Why did we just happen to get a good batch of directors come out in the 70s?
It's partly because they were all trained in the film.
Were they the first? I was going to say, were not like auteur sort of directors? Was everything too controlled before the 70s?
I don't think it was. I think it was a time of change, because you had the sequence like in the late 60s, the production code had sort of started to slacken. So you had the rigidity. When you think of, I think we taught this before, where when you watch a Western at the beginning of the 60s with the Magnificent Seven, people got shot and they went down.
Yeah.
You then had Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, and you had Bonnie and Clyde, you had Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. So the climax of Bonnie and Clyde probably has one of the most, if you think of the sequence with James Caan, it's even more intense in Bonnie and Clyde. The climax of the film where Bonnie and, spoiler alert, where Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty get shot at the very end. It is quite intense. So it would always be interesting to see how, whether or not, if, for example, people were more resistant to violence, if all of a sudden the production code in America said, well, we're going to still keep the guidelines, the kind of sanity of the movies. whether or not we would have seen films like The Godfather or Goodfellas. Because the funny thing is, that it's like with Tarantino with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It seems to me that when you look at violence in films, because gangster movies effectively are part of that thing where, you know, the weird thing is Scarface was responsible for the hip hop. He became a big influence in the hip hop culture. That's an interesting contrast. It's weird. Well, why is it that a movie about Miami drug lords suddenly becomes crosses over and then becomes a video game, or Al Pacino recorded the voices for the video game? Wow, it's crazy.
What was the gap between Godfather 1 and 2?
4 years.
Oh, just 4 years. So they must have been more or less started working on the second one.
Yeah, well, Bob Hope actually had one of the funniest lines from the Oscars when it was nominated. He goes, Godfather 2 has got a great chance of winning. Neither Mr. Price nor Mr. Waterhouse have been seen in 4 days. But again...
The term mafia probably wasn't a big thing then, was it, the first one? Because it wasn't the 70s until they started to believing there was a mafia. You know what I mean? Until then, it was still
But here's the thing: is like a lot of the movies, a lot of these kind of terms and definition, like Cosa Nostra, but
it was a conspiracy theory, like that they thought newspapers had created this enemy called the mafia.
Well, the funny thing is we would, as I'm sure you know, we were talking about the horror. We were talking about horror in the previous thing, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was actually partly financed by the mafia. Bryanston releasing were actually a mafia-backed company.
Why were they just trying to get money?
The famous thing is they nicked all the money. They apparently took all the profits. So again, that was so. And I was actually, funny enough, I was at an event. 2 days ago, and I met an actor who is over from Milan, and he told me apparently that the Italian film industry is run by the mafia.
Jesus, yeah, that makes sense.
They said that basically people are there unless women are only in there unless they want to fuck. So he's come
apparently
over.
That's big in Bollywood as well. That's still, it's like 30 years ago in America. They're still, it's basically who you know and what you're willing to do to get the role.
But it's, but that said, I mean, just summarizing is, I think gangster movies are so lovable anyway. I think they give us a way of, we can watch somebody on screen because it's make believe, but we can sort of not feel guilty. The fact that storytelling, these movies overall can give you a real sense, and somebody's created these worlds, be it Miami in Scarface, be it New York in The Godfather. Well, they become part of this, and everything. Also, a lot of these movies, the cities are as much an identity as they are of the films. It's impossible. You can probably have filmed. You could have taken the characters from. Well, in a way, they go to Las Vegas. They go to Las Vegas. I mean, other films I could have mentioned is Bugsy.
Yeah, Godfather 2, because it has some of that's the whole plan, isn't it? Is they move out to Las Vegas, but then once the home there gets attacked, they move back to the old compound.
Yeah, and then of course it's Cuba as well, because there's a scene, the famous scene where he goes down. There's a revolution going out. So the use of location is also significant.
Well, even the clothing, you could sort of show the clothing from each film and go, right, what film was that? You got the Casino, you got the Goodfellas. You put the suits out, Robert De Niro suit. You go, well, that's from then, that's from that date.
Well, the funny thing is, when I went to the screening of Casino at the London Film Festival, the first scene where Robert De Niro emerges and everybody giggled. Because they just thought, what the fuck is he wearing?
Yeah, the outfits.
Well, the Casino, wasn't that bit where he's changing? He's got a meeting with a cowboy.
Oh, it's because his trousers are hanging up. So he's sat behind the desk. He's got a suit jacket on, and looking, very splendid. I mean, obviously the fashion is horribly dated, but he looks immaculate.
I must also mention in passing one of my favourite films, which is also related, is the Jonathan Demme film Married to the Mob.
Comedy,
which is basically Michelle Pfeiffer is she's this gangster's wife, and she wants to, and it's got Alec Baldwin in it and stuff, and basically she basically is a New York housewife, and he wants
it's a comedy.
It's a comedy drama, but she wants to go straight, and then basically her husband gets shot because he's having an affair with the local gangster, and then she decides to go to New York with her son. And Matthew Modine, who played Private Joker in Full Metal Jacket, he becomes the FBI man surveying it. And I loved it because it's just very very silly. It kind of is a very cute gangster movie. Although there are moments of violence in it. I mean, Dean Stockwell, who plays Tony, the head gangster, and Mercedes Ruehl, who played Jeff Bridges' partner in The Fisher King. She won an Oscar for the film. No, she didn't win. She won an Oscar for Fisher King. She didn't win for Married to the Mob. But I think there's a playfulness. I mean, things like Oscar, for example, there's that wonderful sequence at the beginning where, where Kirk Douglas slaps. He goes, "That's to make you don't forget." It's got Marisa Tomei in it. Bugsy, we must mention the Barry Levinson film is very good.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of sort of gangster films from the 30s and 40s. I mean, Scarface
they are. Well, they were very much studio based. I think they were very much buying into the mass audience thing. I think we kind of think of, you think of White Heat and Angels Have Dirty Faces, with James Cagney. I mean, again, he like Joe Pesci or Bob Hoskins, he compensated in attitude and menace when what he lacked in size. He was so great at that idea but that's the sign of a good actor.
Was that from a screenplay? Was it? Was that a screenplay? Angels with Dirty Faces.
It was one of the many films from the 30s.
The strange ending, because I remember listening to some podcasts about it or something. They were talking about how he was supposed to be seen screaming and all that at the end, being pulled towards it, but the agent said, "No, you're not having him on screen, screaming like a baby." He said, "We'll just show the shadow of him screaming."
Yeah, and of course he said the word in White Heat. "Look, Ma, top of the world," but they were of a very different.
What's the one where he squashes the grapefruit fruit in the?
I think that was Angels of Dirty Faces, where he grabs it.
It's such a horrid thing, and again, it's something you're like, this is 80 years old, and this is really horrible. I mean, no one wants a grapefruit.
But that's a good ending. I like that. The fact that you would sacrifice yourself.
Well, those films always, but those films always had to have the moral ending of the bad guy gets away with it.
Yeah.
I mean, would we call Brighton Rock a gangster film?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's another one. I mean, we haven't had a chance to discuss it, but I think Pinky, he is, the character is, again, Brighton is, is another locale. But again, it's a Graham Greene novel.
Are there any gangster films where the gangster doesn't get his upcomings at the end? Because they're quite simple stories. You can go on this freak ride, but he's going to be fine. They're always going to get.
I don't think it would work. I think that's the joy. That's the joy, is that we do want a bad ending in a gangster movie. We
want to see the baddies, but then as long as they go way back in the closet afterwards.
Okay, if you watch the end of The Longer Friday, there's that. I think that final sequence is just. I think it's a testament to Bob Hoskins' performance, because you watch the last sequence, and you're just thinking the way, just watch it.
So is there any film where at the end crime does pay?
It's ambiguous, but I would say maybe A Most Violent Year. Sort of get away with it.
What's that? What year?
So that's set in the 70s as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's to do with... it's a very odd film to explain, but it's to do with sort of petrol prices, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's got Teamsters in, but he's basically transporting. He buys and sells. It's all cut priced. I don't want to go into it because it's very convoluted.
Well,
but he gets
the
away with it.
Irishman, technically, he doesn't really. Well, he went to jail, I suppose. That's his perf, didn't he?
Yeah, because at the end of Casino,
but he's free man at the end.
It's Robert De Niro survives, and obviously he still lives as a. He basically goes back to being a bookie.
But it's like, but even so, it's like there is. I mean, it's a kind of ambiguous happy ending, because ultimately they did, a lot of them, because of their sins, they have to atone and repent for their sins in some way. Because the moral high ground is of the studio.
His daughter doesn't want to know him and all that sort of stuff.
So that's the thing, is like I think the problem is if you can't have like a big assembly of people. Like, you can't have a sequence like Star Wars where like Henry Hill or the gangsters are walking around and everybody's cheering. It doesn't work, because the problem is that it wouldn't work, because then again you'd probably have somebody sort of on a high platform, sort of with a sniper rifle. Let's blow them all up, and they'd all be down. They'd be shooting down anyway.
I'm trying to think now if there's a gangster.
Because it's quite a simple story, so you'd always have to have there's all the stuff that you want to be, but don't worry, it ends.
Yeah, but it's the vicarious thing of like, oh, look at the gangsters, but But obviously, you have to. I suppose many things have to say.
They all turned.
I'm trying to think if there's one where someone just gets scot. I suppose you could argue then the story hasn't ended. If they've got away scot-free, that just means people are going to say,
well, they say crime doesn't pay. You go, no, the ones that did pay, you don't know about. That's
the ones who had
the millionaires in Spain now.
But it's like, I mean, although it's not a gangster movie, The Last Seduction, which is the John Dow film with Linda Fiorentino, where she played femme fatale. There again, that's an ending that works. But again, it's the fact that the character, again, that she's manipulated everybody. So it's kind of manipulating the audience. But you have to make sure that there's little subtle moments. It works differently. But in The Godfather, for example, again, it's not. The very climactic shot of the film is just about, it kind of sets it up. It sets up who he is, for what it is. And then there's that final shot where the door closes on Diane Keaton. She's sort of said, well, look, I'm going to ask you this once. Did you do those people? And then she does that. Now, of course, he says at one point, he goes, in 5 years' time, the Godfather family is going to be legitimate. Legit, yeah. But the truth is that fate and destiny are always going to bring those people back. It's kind of like in The Godfather Part 3, he goes, just when I thought I was out, they pull him back in, and then he collapses. In Carlito's Way, for example, he's a talented gangster. The thing is, he's trying to break free, and they said to him, Carlito, let us speak the truth. You could have given me up in there. And then you have Viggo Mortensen, who was the Laline, who's the gangster, and of course he turns up at the club where he is, and of course, and Carlito says, he goes, I've got some new people downtown, and you know downtown, when he says that, you're thinking you've just sort of fucked yourself over, and he goes, this is how you repay my friends. He goes, I'm not gonna fucking kill you. You lost, motherfucker. Yeah. But it's like the characters. The characters are. It's not through. I'm not sure whether you could. They're not blameless. Yeah. Characters are not. Gangster movies are not blameless. What we love about them is the fact that we are moral. We're good people. We watch gangster movies because we are kind of like. We are. We're voyeurs of violence. The thing is, we can play it safe because it is a make-believe world. It's a very intense make-believe world, but we watch these movies because going back to The Irishman, we are looking at these actors playing things a certain way. We're taking into account like the fact that it's a Scorsese film. We know for a fact when you look at this movie, it's like, well, because of Goodfellas, they're so strongly defined. So whenever we see Scorsese and Pesci in a Scorsese film, we go, okay, so when's he going to sort of bash somebody's head? Like in Casino, there's that sequence where they're in a bar and he goes, De Niro picks up this pen and goes, is this your pen? He goes, so?
Yeah, he's talking to someone else in the bar.
Yeah, and he goes, is this your pen? He goes, I'm just saying, it's a very nice pen. He goes, why didn't you take that pen and show it? And then basically Pesci sort of stabs him. So at one point, this is the thing about The Irishman, is that at one point the characters are going to have to do something. In a gangster movie, it is a law of averages that they've got to do something violent. It's very difficult. It'll be very difficult for me to watch a gangster film.
A lot of the gangster films are not actually played as baddies, are they? There's always affinity of like they feel sorry or they've lost something.
Well, here's the thing. Bill Duke,
they've lost out.
The black actor Bill Duke, who was in Commando and Predator, he said when he did a movie a while back, I can't remember what it was, but he said that actually bad guys don't think they're bad.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
they don't. They're not.
Family loyalty.
They don't. If you think about it, I mean, the Godfather movies are like you say. You've just picked up on it. Like most key films. Gangster films are about family. The Godfather is about a family trying to go straight. The Marlon Brando character is like a key figure.
Well, their argument, particularly Vito's argument, is that we're no more or less corrupt than the senators and all the politicians who are pulling the strings, so we're not going to be pulled by them.
And if you keep saying family, it conjures up an ethos.
All villains think they're the heroes.
But that's the other thing, is that the period drama does allow you, doing something which is in period actually just allows you to express the thoughts of the time. So The Godfather came out of a comment on America. Now, whatever Coppola's, this is the interesting thing in art, in what you do in art or in film, for example, is that you have a way of expressing your point of view about the world. Ken Loach in the UK, for example, Ken Loach is an absolutely fantastic filmmaker, and we love him because he does make interesting statements, be it what he's just done now, we sorry we missed you, again, is a really great comment about entrepreneurialism against, getting things together. But he does tell, the political kind of perception that you do get with, gangster movies like Oliver Stone, for example, again, it was a statement about America in the 80s. Maybe he was making a statement about immigration. Scorsese, for example, he does like his statements about New York. He wants to talk about things. He talks about, I think Jack Nicholson says something in The Departed where he goes, when you're facing with a loaded gun,
whether you're a cop or a criminal, what's the difference?
And again, that's the thing. It's like he, and again, if you want to talk about The Departed, that was based on a Far East, Japanese,
internal
affairs.
Or was it Infernal Affairs?
Infernal Affairs.
Infernal Affairs was
and it was graded as The Departed. So the gangster films probably, like science fiction, I suppose. Science fiction is another film that makes social statements. We are at a point now where, with what's going on in the world, where I think the creativity and imagination are going to come to the fore again. Mm-hmm. The gangster genre, I think, like the action genre, I think it ran its course with things. Genres do recycle. So Tarantino is now coming to the end of his cycle. Be interested to see what he does for his 10th and final film after Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Is this the 9th or 10th?
This is the 9th film that he's doing. Is
there any talk about the 10th or what it would be?
No, I think Tarantino's...
Kerem was just telling me that he said he might be doing a Star Wars, or he wanted to do Star Trek.
But I think he's abandoned that now.
Okay.
But anyway, so the idea is that they
didn't want Uhura going around barefoot the whole time.
Yeah. So just generally, I think the gangster movie per se will come back at some point. Yeah. I just feel that the Irishman is kind of a way of is kind of a coda to say to people, look, Scorsese said, look, this is my final, because it kind of felt it was a goodbye. Yeah. Pesci probably just said, let's do it. De Niro said, look, we better get on and do this and get it out of the way, because it was a book that De Niro wanted to do.
Yeah.
They got it together.
I didn't like it as a story. I thought for your final film, gangster film, it could have just gone, right, let's just go balls out, a casino-y type. Let's throw all the old tropes in there. But the story of the Hoffa, no one gives a shit now. No one knows who Hoffa is. The kids don't give a fuck.
Yeah, it's odd because in England, we don't know about him at all.
Story
but it's also like A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. That is a very American story. Fred Rogers is, he's, but that's the thing now. Now that would make a really interesting one. I don't know if you've read Ronnie LaDrew, who was responsible for puppeteering Zippy.
No.
Okay, so here's a great. This would make a bloody great film. Ronnie LaDrew was one of the
copyright.
Was one of the puppeteers on Rainbow.
Okay.
And Rainbow was. Do you know what Rainbow was? Yeah. So what was quite funny is he's told this.
Did you say so? Rainbow was what, a British?
So it was basically a 20-minute daily show. It was a kids show. In Britain, and it basically had a guy called Jeffrey Hayes, and there was this big Chewbacca type bear, Bungle. And then you had like George, who was a gay
kind of little pink hippo
who was gay. But they're making jokes about it now. But the thing is because of all the Operation Yewtree thing, Ronnie LaDrew has written a warts and all biography where basically Rod, Jane and Freddie, for example, apparently Rod and Jane were involved as partnership, and Freddie was having an affair with Jane. So
because Zippy was just
and he had a zip.
So the funny thing is
it's about free speech.
So the funny thing is the book actually. It would be a really fun thing, because I think it would be really hilarious to do something which actually sort of really goes behind the scenes of, because with Operation Yewtree, it's sort of darkened the whole thing about
kids TV. Yeah.
But Ronnie LaDrew, I sort of read an extract and I thought, this is bloody hilarious, because it's genuinely a.
It's like the Tears of a Clown. It's funny and hilarious and innocent, but at the same time, there's a cloud over there.
Yeah. It's very much a thing, but yeah, no, you know, it is one of those things where, you know, the gangster movie does bring out some interesting things.
When it was called The Irishman, I thought it was a remake of that good film of the Irish fella in America, New York, to do with the trade unions, wasn't it? Do you remember it came out a few years ago? Oh God, what was it called? He kept goading on the mafia because they kept trying to kill him, and the bomb would explode, but it would blow up the wrong car. Big tall guy. It was made about 7 years ago, and it was about the Irish mafia. One bloke, big
took them on?
Yeah, and it's a famous case where they kept trying to kill him, and the accidents kept happening where they didn't kill him. So he started to think...
This sounds more like a Roadrunner cartoon.
No, it's funny because it's based on the real guy, and you can watch real footage. He's going to the cameras and say, look, they know where I live, this is my address. Yeah. But then they kept fucking up, and then he started to believe in his head he was some, like, reincarnated warrior thing. So he's just started waiting for him. And then eventually they had to get some guy from New York to send over specifically. But he was Irish, and that was the big thing. But... it was. So when I heard The Irishman, I thought that's what it was about. It's quite a big film. I thought, I suppose you haven't heard about it.
But I think they do mention the original novel title on the beginning of the film, which is "I Hear You Paint Houses." It's indicated on the titles of The Irishman anyway.
Any honorary mentions?
What for gangster films? I would recommend. We touched on it briefly. I would recommend A Most Violent Year.
What year was it?
Only a couple of years ago. It's got Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain in it. I'm trying to think of other good sort of in terms of British gangster films.
Well, I think the Guy Ritchie films have a really high profile. I mean, things like
was there a triple? You had Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels.
Snatch.
Was there a third?
Oh, the other one was Revolver.
Yeah,
which absolutely was. It was one of the worst. It was dreadful. It was just like
I've not seen. I've heard.
It was. I watched it. It was kind of. It kind of was brain numbing because Guy Ritchie was trying to do something which, you know, I think this is where it becomes. I think this is where a director, you know, he does like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels was modest. Then he did Snatch and stuff, and but with a lot of these movies. You know, I think they're the same old. I think when you see Danny Dyer or Ray Winston in there, but it is you know, I mean,
I can't think of the last British sort of gangster.
Well, been done, haven't they?
I mean, in terms of cinema releases, you get a lot of the sort of.
Well, most of them. This is the thing. Most of them go straight to DVD.
Yeah.
No, I saw. I did. I've done one. There was one which I did with. There's a couple I've seen recently, but they went straight to video. But they were okay. I mean, they were a little different. Trying to remember who the star was.
Well, that was gangster movies.
Yeah, I'm trying. Can't think of any other honourable. We have had a pretty good cover of. I'm sure there'll be other ones.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, it's. I suppose you've got things like Eastern Promises. Does that count as a gangster film?
Yes, the David Cronenberg. Yeah, Viggo Mortensen, the David Cronenberg film.
That's interesting because it's Russian.
There was also the History of Violence with Ed Harrison. Again, that was a really great one because he plays Viggo Mortensen plays this character who works in a restaurant or a deli. Then Ed Harris turns up and he's got a scar on his face because he insists that bloody Viggo Mortensen did that to him. Like it was like a was it like barbed wire or something?
I can't remember now.
But again, Cronenberg did these two movies. I think were fantastic in terms of their. You know, these were getting back to when Cronenberg was doing really solid films. Anyway, Eastern Promises was very
the Bronx Tale. Would you class that as a gangster film?
Oh yeah, that was cute.
Got a gang in
that was cute because it was a father and son and Chaz Palm. Well, it was based on Chaz Palminteri's stage play, and Robert De Niro purchased it, and then.
Yeah, because De Niro was supposed to play the gangster.
Yeah,
I was listening to him.
Well, Chaz Palminteri was a one-man show. I think he did it on Broadway off Broadway as a one-man show, and then De Niro came to see it and liked it, and then he expanded it and made it into his directorial debut.
Because who's the baddie in it? Sonny something, the Italian fella, Sonny, whatever his name, but he was supposed to be the director.
Because De Niro directed.
De Niro had met him and he said, "Will you play the gangster?" And he said, no, they're not. If you try and fund this, they're not going to let me fund it. I'll be the main guy. Then I'll make myself the father and make you the gangster.
Yeah, that was Chaz Palminteri.
So who is that? The actor?
That was the actor. He was actually just for information, he played the police investigator in The Usual Suspects. He was the one who was interrogating Kevin Spacey.
Doesn't he also play Joey Zaza in? Is he Joey Zaza in Godfather 3?
No, that was Joe Mantegna.
Oh, that's it. Yes, yeah. Sorry.
So Godfather Part 3 was. I think it was unfortunately criticised because Sofia Coppola was cast as the daughter.
I don't think she's that bad.
No, she's not bad. But I think Winona Ryder, who was originally going to play it, but again she withdrew because of exhaustion. You know, she arrived in Rome about 2 days before film was going to begin, and then she literally collapsed.
Yeah. Did Robert Duvall refuse to come back, or?
Yeah, he didn't want to do. He didn't want to do it. Interesting enough, at one point when that was being developed, Stallone was actually attached to Godfather.
Oh, who would he have been playing?
No, but that was saying it was touted at the time when Coppola, when they were sort of trying to put it in development. I know at one point, probably around 1991 too. I mean, Stallone was actually attached to the thing, but I just feel that. I think what Stallone would have done is he would have clearly tried to make it more like an action movie.
It's just when I thought I was bad. Yeah, but you're right. What you said before, if you had have changed the name, changed it a little bit, and let people assume that
you could have had Pacino in it still.
Yeah, people go, no, that was sort of the end of Godfather. You would have been all right, but don't go there. This is the next installment.
I mean, I do like the fact that you have people like Nero back in it. You know, the assassin like Carlo and all those guys are back in it still. I mean, they're doddery old men trying to murder people.
I got confused in that because who's the guy that kills the guy in the hospital and they shoot him? The assassin.
Yeah.
But then there's another assassin.
No, he has
that
two.
Looks the same.
They have because it's the other bodyguard from Sicily originally. So they go back.
Yeah, so I got confused who was who.
Well, they also retcon it because I think he actually gets killed in Godfather 2, doesn't he? But then they retcon it that he was just wounded or something.
So there was two old fellas that were assassins.
Yeah.
Oh, it was.
So there's Neri, isn't it? Is the assassin in so he's the assassin in 1 and 2, and I think he dies in 2, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He gets killed after he kills. Spoiler alert. I forgot his name.
The priest.
No, after he kills in Godfather 2. After he kills, who's the primary antagonist? The Jewish gangster, the old Jewish gangster.
Oh, Hyman Roth.
Hyman Roth. Thank you. Yeah. So I think he
in the hospital.
He
shoots
puts
a pillow over him, doesn't he?
No, I don't think so. He shoots him at the airport, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But he gets shot running away, but then they retcon it in 3 that he's still alive.
Oh, okay, right.
I mean, just one of my favourite sequences in Godfather is the climax with the 5 families being killed.
Yeah.
And there's a sequence, the editing in that where you go from, the way it's edited where you have, the 4 things and the music is playing and then if they're christening the baby, which of course is played by the baby, Sofia Coppola. Andy Garcia on the set of The Godfather Part 3, Coppola said to him, "So you see my daughter Sophia over there? She was the baby in Godfather 1." But I love things like when somebody Mo Green gets shot in the eye
because he looks up, he has to put his glasses on, and
then the thing explodes. And then there's the thing where the girl gets trapped, and then there's the shooting of the couple in the bed and stuff like that. But it's the editing is really put together.
Did you see the John Gotti film? The John Travolta?
I haven't seen that one.
Oh god, apparently it's not great.
It's not. Funny enough, the good John Gotti film is the one that was made before that, a few years before. Bit more of a TV. I can't remember who played him, but that was actually quite good.
Yeah.
That worked. The other one was like they're just trying to fit the story. It doesn't too much stuff on the side.
It's not a film, but as a sort of quasi. I mean, it lost its way as it went on, but was Boardwalk Empire.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah,
that's it was executive produced by Scorsese, I think, but it starred Steve. I can never know it's Buscemi or Buscemi.
Steve Buscemi.
Buscemi, yeah.
No, who he kind of has that look. I think his manic look about him. I mean, that's the other thing. Finally, is like the look of the Godfathers. That there's certain gangsters. Like I think it happened with like going to some of the comedy things like Analyze This. I mean, I love that very funny
that
moment.
verse on, yeah.
And then of course you had the gangsters running the shipyards in Eraser. The scene where like he goes and Schwarzenegger goes, you do realize that there are people with air arms on your dockland, and he goes, That I did not know about.
Was that
And it's got-
a gangster film then?
Well, it wasn't.
no.
It was just
Is that
basically.
De Niro in it?
Analyze this. Yeah, it's a comedy.
It's basically De Niro is a gangster.
Just shaking your
De
head.
Niro
De Niro-
died after
De Niro-
Casino. I haven't heard from him since.
De Niro is basically a gangster who's traumatized, and basically Billy Crystal becomes a therapist, and of course Lisa Kudrow plays the wife. So, of course,
First, I think I haven't seen Analyze That. I'm reliably informed it's
I don't
not
wanna
great, but
see it.
Analyze This is quite funny. I think.
yeah. And there's a scene where, and there's a wonderful moment at the end where Billy Crystal is posing as the gangster, and then he literally slaps the gangster. And again, this is the other funny thing.
Because he corrects him because he can't say consigliere.
And he goes, belly, balabam, balabing, belly boo.
So that's gangster movies.
That is gangster
Don't know about
movies.
those.
I think
Gangster
we've
movie.
gone through. I mean, most of them, not all of them.
Yeah,
I think.
the top ones at least.
Yeah. I would
Well,
say so.
I think that to me that was. I just felt that it's always interesting because I think for me it was about reflecting on the gangster film. And also it's also nice because sometimes we see so many of them, and I mean the familiarity of the titles, for example, are pretty much what we all know. And I kind of felt, well, the good thing about this podcast is they are titles that everybody's familiar with.
One of the many good things about this podcast is that
Yes, many good things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That was Theo whistling /
Kerem.
ruining the audio. Now. Yeah, you can see Kerem look up there in the shot.
Someone's got anything else to say? No, gangster
That's also
films?
not interference. That's John doing the other theme.
Yeah.
The love
Drowning,
theme, I
he's
suppose,
got-
isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So I was definitely going to look up this book.
So
This is
Making
really good.
Movies,
Making
Sidney
Movies
Lumet.
by Sidney Lumet.
Yeah. Lumet.
Nobody corrected me. No, I'm going with Lumet, mate.
All right. Okay.
Mate.
Okay. Fine.
What does it say? What's this? Read this here.
It says, this is by Roger Ebert. It goes, invaluable. I am sometimes asked if there is one book a filmgoer could read to learn more about how movies are made and what to look for while watching them. This is the book. Roger Ebert, the New York Times Book Review. I'll also just read the two other things on the back. Remarkable, as dignified as the movies Lumet has made, and yet deeply felt and very moving. Anyone who truly loves movies ought to read what he has to say about them. Delightfully engrossing, New York Times, Los Angeles Times. Film would be a better place if every director was required to share with other romancers of film his process. It is a gift to us all that it is Sidney Lumet, one of America's greatest filmmakers, who is sharing his point of view, Steven Spielberg.
Oh. What's the really good documentary about digital versus film with
Side by side.
what's
With
his
Keanu
Matrix?
Reeves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very good.
As a fascinating look at how not to make a film, and it is about gangsters. If you Google, I mean, other search engines are available, but don't bother. If you just Google a film called The Big I Am, I think you'll find a link. It's to I can't remember I think it's something like Lights, Gangsters, Disasters is the subheadline, and it's a very candid interview with the people who made this British gangster film a couple of years back. Had a pretty decent budget, had on the face of it quite a decent cast. You had Leo Gregory, Vincent Regan, and Michael Madsen amongst others. And it was just, the making of it was just a disaster. You just read it and you're just like, what is going on here? But it's really fascinating.
What's that called?
The film is called The Big I Am. So I think if you look it up, I mean, maybe if you looked up The Big I Am making of article, something like that, they're just really candid about what a clusterfuck that the making of that film was. So it's really interesting, yeah.
Well, there you go. That's gangster films.
And that's gangster
Thanks,
films, yes.
John.
So thank
That's
you, John.
You're
First
welcome.
guest
We'll
of
see you
2020
for-
as well,
Great,
actually.
2020,
Oh, that's
first
right,
guest.
yeah.
Hey!
We got the new pop filters since you've been here.
Yeah.
Impressed? New pop filters.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's great.
slightly darker blue than the other
Krem's
one.
up. He's up.
Yeah, Krem's up.
He's ready.
His
Pictures
his
tweet.
pizza's arrived.
All right. Cheers.
All right. Cheers,
thanks a lot,
everyone.
John.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. Bye.
Bye.